10. The spy who never stopped playing the game. Before Putin became Russia's most powerful man, he was living a life straight out of a Cold War novel. In the 1980s, he served as a KGB intelligence officer in Dresden, East Germany, a world of secret informants, coded messages, and Cold War paranoia. But unlike the Hollywood image of tuxedo-clad spies, Putin's reality was far grittier. He once described the KGB as not James Bond, but rather a system of men quietly doing their duty. Still, his years there molded him into the calculating strategist the world knows today. When the Berlin Wall fell in 1989, Putin wasn't behind a desk in Moscow. He was watching the chaos unfold from Dresden, guarding KGB files from angry East German mobs who were ready to storm his office. Without direct orders from Moscow, he famously phoned the Soviet command for help, only to hear, "Moscow is silent." That moment shaped his worldview forever, a deep distrust of weakness and a belief that Russia must never again be caught unprepared. Later, when he rose to power, many of his decisions, from annexing Crimea to building up the military, came from that same mindset of control and readiness. Even after leaving the KGB, the spy mentality never left him. Friends have said that Putin always looks for the motive behind every move, treating diplomacy like a psychological game of chess. In his mind, every handshake hides a secret strategy. That SY world leaders often describe meeting Putin as both fascinating and unnerving. His expression rarely gives away what he is thinking. And in classic KGB fashion, he often keeps opponents guessing, using silence and unpredictability as his greatest weapons. Number 9. The Unexpected Rise. From taxi driver to the Kremlin. It is hard to imagine the man now sitting in the Kremlin once driving a taxi to pay the bills, but that's exactly what happened. After the fall of the Soviet Union, the 1990s plunged Russia into economic chaos. Jobs disappeared overnight, inflation exploded, and millions struggled to survive. Putin was no exception. Having left the KGB, he found himself unemployed with a family to support, and he's admitted that he occasionally worked as a taxi driver in St. Petersburg to make ends meet. It was a humiliating step for someone who had once served in the Soviet intelligence elite. But that's the strange thing about Putin's rise. It came not from privilege, but from survival instinct. He began working in the mayor's office in St. Petersburg, handling international relations, where his discipline and loyalty caught the eye of his boss, Anatoly Sobchak, a reformist politician and law professor. Sobchak became Putin's mentor, and through him, Putin learned how politics worked in the new Russia, the deals, the alliances, and the quiet power plays behind the scenes. When Sobchak lost his re-election campaign, Putin's career seemed over again. But fate had other plans. In 1996, he moved to Moscow and was quickly absorbed into the presidential administration. His loyalty and ability to stay invisible, a habit from his KGB days, helped him rise through the ranks under Boris Yeltsin. Within just 3 years, this quiet bureaucrat became prime minister, and by the end of 1999, after Yeltsin's sudden resignation, he was acting president of Russia. The world woke up on New Year's Eve to find a former spy turned taxi driver suddenly leading the world's largest country. His first televised address was calm and emotionless, promising stability to a nation exhausted by chaos. That tone never changed. From the very start, Putin positioned himself as the man who could bring order where others had failed. Looking back, it is one of the most dramatic political ascents in modern history. A man who went from the shadows of East Germany to the spotlight of global power in just over a decade. His story isn't one of luck, but of cold calculation, timing, and a relentless belief that control is everything. 8. The carefully crafted superhuman image. If you've ever seen photos of Vladimir Putin riding a horse shirtless through the Siberian wilderness, or diving to discover ancient Greek artifacts underwater, you've witnessed one of the most calculated public relations campaigns in modern history. These moments aren't random. They are part of a carefully built myth that portrays Putin as the ultimate embodiment of Russian strength, endurance, and masculinity. His team understands that in a country with a long history of idolizing strong leaders, from Peter the Great to Stalin, image matters as much as policy, so they've turned Putin into a living legend. Whether he's shooting a tranquilizer dart at a tiger to protect researchers, piloting a fighter jet, or driving a Lada across frozen tundra, every photo is designed to send one message. Russia is powerful because its leader is powerful. But what's truly fascinating is how deeply this image resonates with ordinary Russians. Many remember the economic humiliation of the 1990s, when Western fast food chains and foreign advisors poured into Moscow and the ruble collapsed. Putin's rugged persona stood in direct contrast to that weakness. He became a symbol of pride, a man who could stare down the West and restore Russia's dignity. Western media often mocked the staged photo shoots, calling them macho theater. But inside Russia, they worked. His approval ratings often soared after these stunts, proof that the psychology of power mattered more than logic or policy. Behind the scenes, however, the reality is more complex. The dives that found ancient artifacts in the Black Sea, later revealed to have been planted there beforehand. The tranquilized tiger, pre-sedated for safety. But facts rarely mattered. What mattered was the story, and Putin understood stories better than anyone. He turned himself into a brand, part warrior, part father figure, part savior. State television amplified this myth daily, creating a near-mythological narrative where Putin wasn't just a president, he was Russia itself. Even his birthday is celebrated like a national holiday, filled with documentaries praising his achievements. That's no accident. Putin learned early that in politics, perception is power, and he mastered it so completely that even his critics admit no one on earth controls their own image like Vladimir Putin. Number 7. The billion-dollar mystery. No one really knows how rich Vladimir Putin actually is, and that mystery might be one of the most controversial facts about him. Officially, his annual salary as president is around $140,000, and he claims to own a modest apartment, 2 Soviet-era cars, and a small garage. But that's only the surface of the iceberg. Investigations from journalists, intelligence agencies, and exiled Russian insiders suggest that Putin may secretly control a vast fortune, possibly over $100 billion, hidden behind layers of shell companies, loyal oligarchs, and offshore accounts. If true, it would make him one of the richest men on earth. So how does a former spy accumulate such unimaginable wealth? The key lies in the way modern Russia's economy operates. During the 1990s, when state industries were privatized, a small group of businessmen, later known as oligarchs, became billionaires overnight. When Putin came to power, he made them an offer they couldn't refuse. Stay out of politics, and you can keep your fortunes. Cross me, and you lose everything. Those who played by his rules thrived. Those who didn't, like Mikhail Khodorkovsky, once Russia's richest man, ended up in prison or exile. Over time, these oligarchs acted as financial extensions of Putin's will, investing in luxury properties, yachts, and energy companies that quietly tied back to his network. One of the most famous examples is the so-called Putin-S Palace on the Black Sea. A sprawling mansion complex worth over $1 billion, complete with a private theater, underground hockey rink, and Italian marble interiors. The Kremlin denied it belonged to him, of course, but a 2021 investigation by opposition leader Alexei Navalny, A.S. team, claimed to have traced the funding back to Putin, E.S. close associates. The video of that investigation went viral, with millions of views across the globe. Inside Russia, many dismissed it as Western propaganda, but abroad, it reinforced the image of Putin as a man whose wealth, and secrecy mirrored his power, vast, untraceable, and untouchable. The truth is, no one outside his inner circle really knows where Putin's money is or how much he controls. It's part of the design. He learned from the Soviet system that power isn't just about owning things, it is about having access to them. And so, while he may not have a bank account with his name on it, those who owe him their fortunes ensure that he never needs one. His real wealth isn't counted in dollars, it's measured in loyalty. When your friends are billionaires and your enemies are exiled or imprisoned, money becomes secondary. You don't have to possess everything if you already control everyone who does. 6. The puppet master of modern geopolitics. In global politics, very few leaders play the long game like Vladimir Putin. To understand how he shapes world events, you have to think like a chess player, someone who is always planning 3 moves ahead while his opponents are still arguing about the rules. Ever since taking office in the early 2000s, Putin has made one thing clear: Russia would never again be a passive player on the world stage. He believed the collapse of the Soviet Union was the greatest geopolitical catastrophe of the 20th century, and from that belief came his life's mission: to restore Russia's influence by any means necessary. His first step was re-establishing control over former Soviet republics. In 2008, he tested the waters in Georgia, backing separatists in South Ossetia and Abkhazia. When the world hesitated to respond, he learned a valuable lesson: boldness pays off. 6 years later, he made his biggest move, annexing Crimea from Ukraine in 2014. It was the first time since World War II that a European nation had redrawn its borders by force, and yet, within weeks, Crimea was under Russian control. Western nations imposed sanctions, but inside Russia, Putin's approval ratings skyrocketed. To the Russian people, it wasn't just about territory, it was about reclaiming pride. And it didn't stop there. Putin's geopolitical playbook stretched far beyond his borders. He intervened in Syria in 2015, saving Bashar al-Assad's regime and positioning Russia as a Middle Eastern power broker. It was a masterstroke. While the West debated airstrikes and resolutions, Russian planes were already dominating the skies. But Putin's influence wasn't limited to battlefields. He recognized early on that modern warfare was as much digital as physical. Cyber attacks, disinformation, and propaganda became his new weapons. Intelligence agencies across the West have accused Russia of interfering in elections, including the 2016 U.S. presidential race, not necessarily to favor one candidate over another, but to spread division, chaos, and mistrust in democratic systems. In Putin's worldview, instability in the West equals strength for Russia. Critics call him a manipulator. Admirers call him a strategist. Either way, Putin turned Russia, once dismissed as a fading superpower, into the unpredictable wild card of world politics. His genius isn't just in what he does, but in how he does it, quietly, persistently, with the patience of a man who watched empires rise and fall and knows exactly how to exploit their weaknesses. Whether it's through military power, economic leverage, or pure psychological warfare, Putin has built a geopolitical empire of influence without ever needing to conquer one. Number 5. The iron grip on information. If you want to understand Putin's power, don't just look at his army. Look at his control of information. In modern Russia, the Kremlin doesn't just govern people, it governs perception. From his first term as president, Putin understood that whoever controls the narrative controls the nation. And so he made sure the Russian media landscape became his fortress. Within a few years, almost every major television channel was either owned by the state or by companies loyal to the Kremlin. The message was clear. There would be no more chaotic, critical coverage like in the 1990s. Under his rule, journalism became a dangerous profession. Independent reporters investigating corruption or human rights abuses often found themselves harassed, silenced, or worse. The most infamous case was Anna Politkovskaya, a journalist who exposed atrocities during the Chechen War. She was assassinated in 2006 on Putin's birthday, a chilling coincidence that many saw as symbolic. The Kremlin denied involvement, but the message was unmistakable. Dissent carried a price. Beyond traditional media, Putin's government mastered the internet long before other authoritarian regimes did. They created armies of online trolls and bot farms to flood social media with pro-Kremlin narratives and drown out opposing voices. These weren't random memes. They were state-sponsored psychological operations, shaping public opinion both inside and outside Russia. Domestic critics often found their blogs blocked, their accounts hacked, or their websites labeled as foreign agents. The term itself became a weapon, used to brand independent organizations as traitors. But Putin's strategy wasn't just censorship, it was replacement. Instead of eliminating the media entirely, he created an alternative reality through controlled outlets like RT, formerly Russia Today. Broadcast in English, RT became a global megaphone for the Kremlin's worldview, one that questioned Western motives, amplified divisions, and portrayed Russia as the voice of reason in a hypocritical world. Many viewers abroad dismissed it as propaganda, but millions tuned in, curious to hear the other side. That's exactly what Putin wanted. He didn't need to convince everyone. He just needed to make people doubt everything. Inside Russia, this information ecosystem created a population that sees Putin not as a dictator, but as a defender. When the economy struggles, the media blames Western sanctions. When protests erupt, they're labeled as foreign interference. And when Putin appears on screen, calm and collected, he's the only constant in a world full of chaos. It's not just propaganda. It's psychological armor. He once said, "The collapse of information control is the collapse of the state." And he's made sure his never collapses. Paragraph 4. The man who lives like a ghost. For someone who dominates headlines across the world, Vladimir Putin's personal life remains one of the best-guarded secrets of any modern leader. He's everywhere, yet nowhere. Reporters joke that he's Russia's most photographed man and least understood. And that's exactly how he wants it. Putin learned early in his KGB years that visibility is vulnerability. The less people know about you, the harder it is to control you. So he built his private life into a fortress of mystery. Officially, Putin is divorced. He married Lyudmila Shkribneva in 1983, and the two were together for nearly 3 decades before publicly announcing their separation in 2013. They have 2 daughters, Maria and Katerina, but you'll never see them in tabloids or at public events. Their identities are so protected that for years, even Western intelligence agencies couldn't confirm exactly where they lived. When Russian journalists tried to publish information about them, the articles vanished overnight. The Kremlin's message was clear. Putin's family is off limits. So, where does he live? That's another puzzle. He officially resides in the Kremlin, but reports suggest he spends much of his time in secret residences across Russia, from Sochi to Valdai to Lake Ladoga. Some of these compounds are rumored to contain underground tunnels, helicopter pads, even personal monasteries. He rarely travels without an identical convoy of cars to confuse observers and potential attackers. His daily schedule is unpredictable, often communicated to officials at the last minute. Even high-ranking members of his government sometimes don't know exactly where he is. This obsession with secrecy extends to his health. In a country where leaders once appeared frail before vanishing from public view, Putin's image is built on eternal strength. That rumors of illness, from back problems to cancer, are immediately denied or mocked by the Kremlin. But the real reason for this control isn't vanity. It's strategy. In Russia's political system, where Putin is the center of power, even a hint of weakness could destabilize everything. To the public, he must appear ageless and indestructible. the living symbol of stability. Behind closed doors, accounts from people who've met him describe a man who measures every word, maintains long silences, and rarely shows emotion. He avoids alcohol, keeps a strict diet, and follows an intense exercise routine that includes swimming for hours at a time. It's discipline bordering on obsession, a reflection of his military mindset. He once said, "There's no such thing as a former KGB man." And that's not just about ideology, it's about identity. Even now, Putin behaves like an operative in hostile territory. Cautious, controlled, and always prepared for betrayal. In the end, Putin's private life is less about luxury and more about control. The secrecy is the point. The less you know about who he really is, the more power the myth gains. In a world where politicians overshare, Putin's silence speaks volumes. He doesn't need to be relatable. He needs to be untouchable. Part 3. The Master of Fear and Loyalty. In politics, there are two ways to rule: through love or through fear. Putin chose both. His leadership style is a delicate balance between rewarding loyalty and crushing defiance. The result is a system that operates less like a democracy and more like a hierarchy of fear. From the moment he took office, Putin surrounded himself with people from his past, many former KGB colleagues or St. Petersburg officials who had proven their loyalty during tough times. They became known as the Siloviki, men of force, and they now control nearly every major institution in Russia, from energy companies to the military to the media. But loyalty in Putin's Russia isn't just about friendship. It's a survival strategy. Those who serve him well are rewarded with wealth and protection. Those who betray him are erased from the picture. Over the years, several critics, defectors, and opposition figures have met suspicious ends: poisoned, imprisoned, or disappeared. When former spy Alexander Litvinenko was poisoned with radioactive polonium in London in 2006, British investigators traced the trail back to Russian agents. The Kremlin denied involvement, of course, but the message to insiders was unmistakable. No one escapes betrayal. Inside Russia, fear operates more subtly. Political opponents are harassed with endless tax audits, business owners are charged with corruption, and protesters vanish into a legal maze. Yet even in this atmosphere, Putin maintains a strange popularity. Many Russians see him not as a tyrant, but as a protector, a man who restored order after the chaos of the 1990s. In their eyes, his toughness isn't cruelty, it's competence. They don't fear him in the Western sense. They trust him to keep the wolves away. This duality, fear and faith, is the core of Putin's power. It's not about ideology or party politics. It's about personal authority. Every Russian official, every oligarch, knows that their fate depends not on the Constitution, but on the will of one man. That creates a chain of loyalty stronger than any law. Even those who secretly oppose him play along, because in Putin's system, there's no alternative. You either serve or you vanish. Psychologists call this kind of governance personalist autocracy, a regime built entirely around one individual. But Putin has taken it a step further. He doesn't just control Russia, he defines it. He's turned himself into the personification of national identity, the father, the protector, the warrior. And just like any patriarch, he rewards obedience and punishes betrayal. That emotional bond is why, even after 2 decades in power, he remains, to many Russians, the only man capable of keeping the country together. Fear is his weapon. Loyalty is his armor. And together, they've created one of the most durable political systems in modern history. Part 2. The Eternal Leader. Rewriting the Rules of Power. In most countries, presidents come and go. In Putin's Russia, the rules bend before the man. Since taking office at the dawn of the new millennium, he has managed to remain at the top of the political food chain for more than 2 decades, longer than any Russian ruler since Stalin. How? By mastering not just politics, but the architecture of power itself. In 2008, after serving 2 consecutive presidential terms, the Constitution barred Putin from running again. Most politicians would step aside, write memoirs, and enjoy retirement. Putin simply switched seats. He handpicked his loyal ally Dmitry Medvedev as president, became prime minister himself, and, without ever technically breaking the rules, continued to run the country from behind the curtain. Insiders said Medvedev's presidency was like a play. Putin wrote the script, directed the cast, and waited off stage for his cue to return. 4 years later, he did exactly that, reclaiming the presidency in 2012 with overwhelming control of every institution. But that wasn't the end of his political engineering. In 2020, amid the global pandemic, Putin pushed through a constitutional reform that reset his term limits entirely, meaning he could legally stay in power until 2036. If he does, he'll be in his mid-80s, ruling a nation of 140 million people for nearly half a century. When asked why he needed to extend his rule, Putin said it was to ensure stability. To his critics, it was the final move in transforming democracy into a stage-managed monarchy. Still, there's more to it than ambition. For Putin, control isn't just about staying in office. It's about preventing Russia from collapsing again as it did in the 1990s. In his worldview, strong leadership is the only defense against chaos, a lesson learned from history. The Soviet Union fell in his eyes, not because of dictatorship, but because of weakness. That's why he's rewritten the system to make himself indispensable. Remove Putin, and the structure falls apart. That's not an accident. It's design. Even today, his approval ratings in Russia remain higher than most Western leaders could dream of, despite international sanctions, economic downturns, and wars. It's a paradox. The more isolated Russia becomes, the stronger his domestic image grows. Many Russians equate him with national pride itself, and for Putin, that's the ultimate form of immortality, not just leading a country, but becoming its identity. Number 1. The legacy that outlives him. When history eventually writes its chapter on Vladimir Putin, it won't be a simple story. To some, he will be remembered as the man who restored Russia's power after decades of decline. To others, he'll be seen as the authoritarian who crushed dissent, invaded neighbors, and reshaped the world order with ruthless precision. But either way, his shadow will stretch far beyond his lifetime. Putin's legacy isn't just political, it's psychological. He transformed how people think about leadership in the modern world. In an era of short-term politics and public opinion polls, he proved that patience, control, and long-term strategy could still dominate. He showed that power could be maintained not by ideology, but by narrative, by convincing millions that without him, their country would fall apart. That belief became self-fulfilling. On the international stage, Putin's actions forced the world to rethink everything about post-Cold War stability. He redrew borders in Europe, challenged NATO, brokered alliances in the Middle East, and positioned Russia as both a threat and a necessity. Even his enemies admit, whether you like him or not, you cannot ignore him. His fingerprints are on every global crisis of the past 20 years, from Ukraine to Syria to the energy wars of Europe. But perhaps the strangest part of Putin's legacy lies in his unpredictability. He doesn't just react to events, he creates them. Allies and adversaries alike spend more time guessing his next move than countering his last one. That uncertainty, that sense that anything could happen, may be his most powerful weapon of all, because as long as no one can predict him, no one can control him. And when his era finally ends, whether through resignation, revolt, or simply time, Russia will still be living in the system he built. The structures, the loyalties, the fear, and the pride, all of it will bear his imprint. Like the czars before him, Putin has fused himself with the state. In a way, that's his greatest triumph and his greatest curse. He made himself eternal, but only by ensuring that Russia can never truly move on without him. History may debate whether he was a visionary or a tyrant, but there's no denying one thing. Vladimir Putin changed the course of the 21st century, and whether the world likes it or not, we're all still living in his shadow. Conclusion plus CTA. From a KGB spy in East Germany to one of the most powerful and polarizing figures on Earth, Vladimir Putin's life reads like a political thriller, full of secrets, strategy, and a relentless pursuit of control. His journey reveals not just the story of one man, but the evolution of an entire nation through him. Whether you see him as a symbol of national pride or a warning about unchecked power, one thing is certain. The world before Putin and the world after him will never be the same. If you enjoyed this deep dive into the most fascinating facts about Putin, don't forget to hit like and share this video to help more people discover it. Subscribe to our channel for more gripping stories from history, politics, and the hidden corners of the modern world. And if you want to go further, hit join to become a channel member for exclusive content, or send us a super thanks below to support our next investigation. Your support helps us keep uncovering the truths behind the world's most powerful people.